大家好，我叫季凯轩. Hello everyone, my name is Ryuzat. Welcome to today's Chinese class. Today we're going to be looking at Chinese measure words. The measure word is basically used to specify a certain quantity of a given noun. For example, in English, you can have something like a cup of tea, a box of chocolate, or a bottle of water. In Chinese, you can have a direct translation like 一杯茶,一盒巧克力, or 一瓶水. The Chinese measure word is definitely more than the English measure word. One thing to know about the Chinese measure word is that, for example, in English, when you say a teacher, you can't just say 一老师. No, what you're supposed to say is what? 一个老师. That is, you need to add a measure word in between the number and the noun. So now let's look at the structure. We have the number, the measure word, and the noun. For example, 三个人, which means 3 people, 五只猫, 5 cats, and 一个房间, a room. Then we can also have the demonstrative pronoun, the measure word, and the noun. For example, you can have something like 这个人, which means this person, 那只猫, which means that cat, and 哪个房间, which means which room. The first measure word we're going to be looking at is 个. 个 is a generic measure word used with nouns for people, some non-human items, abstract objects, and words. 个 is generic because it can be used sometimes to substitute those special measure words that cannot be remembered. So for example, we have 这个人, which means this person. 五个同学, which means 5 classmates. 这个房间很小, this room is small. The second measure word we're going to be looking at is 本. 本. 本 is a measure word used for something bound, such as books or magazine, periodicals, or files. For example, we have 一本书. 一本书, which means a book or one book. Then we have 两本词典. 两本词典, which means 2 dictionaries. The next measure word we're going to be looking at is zhāng. Zhāng. Zhāng is a measure word used for flat objects like table, paper, card, and so on. For example, we have something like 两张卡. 两张卡, which means 2 cards. Or you can have a sentence like 我的房间有一张桌子. 我的房间有一张桌子, which means my room has a table, or there is a table in my room. Then we can have something like 你有一张纸吗? Do you have a paper? Our next measure word is jiàn. Jiàn is a measure word used for situation, furnitures, or clothes, and some other things. For example, you can say 一件家具. 一件家具, which means a piece of furniture. You can also say 一件事, which means an event or a situation. You can also have a sentence like 我想买两件衣服, which means I want to buy 2 clothes. As you can see, 两 is used here before a measure word to mean 2, instead of us using r. So we use what? 两. The fifth measure word we're looking at is tiǎo. Tiǎo. So tiǎo is a measure word we use for something that is long. For example, a rope, a snake, or a river. So you can say something like 一条河. 一条河, which means a river. You can also say 一条裤子. 一条裤子, a pair of pants. Or you can say something like 两条蛇. 两条蛇, which means 2 snakes. The sixth measure word we're looking at is liàng. Liàng is a measure word for vehicles. For example, you can say something like 3辆出租车. 三辆出租车 which means 3 taxis. And you can have something like 这辆汽车 which means this car. Or you can say 一辆自行车 which means a bicycle. The seventh measure word we're looking at is zhāng. Zhāng is a measure word used for animal. It's a generic measure word used for animals. It is generic because there are still some measure word used for some specific animals. We're going to talk about that very soon. So, for example, you can say 一只猫 which means a cat, or 三只鸟 which means 3 birds. Then you can have tiǎo. Tiǎo, as we just said earlier on, is a measure word for something long, but it can also be used for some specific animals. For example, you have animals like fish, snake, and dog. So you can say 一条鱼, 一条蛇, or 一条狗. You can also say 一只狗. Another measure word we use for some certain animals is 头, which originally means head. But it is used for some animals like some livestock like pig or cow. So for example, you can say 一头猪, 一头猪, or 一头牛. The next measure we're looking at is shuāng, which is the measure used for something in pairs. And we also have zhi, the same measure will be used for animals, but here it is being used for one of the pairs. So for example, you have something like 一双筷子, which means a pair of chopsticks. And if you have 一只筷子, it means one chopstick. We can also have something like 一双眼睛, which means a pair of eyes. And you can have 一只眼睛, which means one eye. Also, you can have something like 一双鞋子, which means a pair of shoes. And you can have 一只鞋子, which means a shoe. Let's look at some things to note about measure words. Flower is one of the nouns that have different measure words. For example, you have 朵, 枝, and 树. These measure words are used depending on the appearance of the flower or the quantity of the flower. So it can have something like 一朵花, which means a flower, but this one is just talking about the flower alone without the stem. Then you can have 一枝花, which means the flower, a flower and the stem. And this tree is also used for something that is straight, like a ruler or a pencil. And we also have 一束花. 一束花 means a bunch of flowers. Another thing to note is that sometimes nouns like 天 and 年 do not require measure word. For example, you can have something like 我只有3天, which means I only have 3 days. Or you can say something like 我在中国待了2年, which means I was in China for 2 years. However, 个 is being used as a measure word for month and week, which is 月 and 星期 respectively. So using that same example, we can say something like 我只有3个月, which means I only have 3 months. Or you can say 我在中国待了2个星期, which means I was in China for 3 weeks. Finally, if a noun that is referred to in a sentence is the number 1, which is 一, the number can be omitted. For example, when you want to say something like 我有一个姐姐, you can simply say 我有个姐姐. So you've already omitted the 一. Both of them mean I have one elder sister. Or you can also say something like 你是个狼人, which means you're a lazy person. Thank you for watching. I'm sure that you've learned one or two things about Chinese measure word. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Okay, so see you in the next class. 再见。